Governor, if you and all join us as we pledge allegiance to this great flag of ours. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Please be seated. Governor Huckabee, it's an honor to be with you today here, and I'm going to kick off with a report from Chairman Rogers' message. And what do you see as America's proper place in the world? And what are our global responsibilities that we must address to ensure we protect our freedom and liberty within this great country of ours?
Well, first of all, I want to say thanks to you, General, and to the folks who are here. And, we don't have a room full, but we have the smartest people in South Carolina who have gathered here today. And that's what's important. I think a lot of Americans never stop to think about what our role is and what it should be. America has been a leader in the world. A leader in the world and a leader for the world. And we can't shirk from that responsibility without severe consequences to the American people. A lot of Americans would love to live in an isolationist environment in which we just sort of close our doors, bring in the ranks, and say it's really not any of our concern what happens in other parts of the world. But that would be naive. It would also be disastrous, because we've never lived in an isolated world. But now with technology and travel capacity like we have it, we are more globally connected than we've ever been before. It does matter what happens in other countries. It matters not only because of the economic impact, it matters because of the potential security impact. If there is an uprising of radical Islam in the Middle East, and those radicals have an opportunity to communicate to potential radicals in the United States, we can be creating homegrown terrorists because of the technology that knows no border. If people can travel from one country to the other and they can bring their radical ideas to this nation, whether they skip across the southern border or whether they come in on a visa and end up overstaying their visa and flying an airplane into the World Trade Centers, we need to understand we are not isolated. We cannot be. If there is an attempt by a world leader, whether it's Vladimir Putin or the president of China, and they want to build up their military so that they can become aggressive, move into nations that are neighboring to them, or nations that have resources that they would simply like to plunder, our inability to even show a level of capacity for a deterrence of that ultimately will impact us. And so I'm just very concerned when I hear people say, what happens, and usually the phrase is, over there, doesn't affect Americans. Well, yes, it does. And America should decide that it's going to have the most robust, best trained, best equipped, best prepared, and best financed military in the history of mankind. I believe with all my heart, General, that even when I hear my fellow Republicans on the debate stage say, well, I'd prefer diplomacy to war. Well, of course, we all would. But I've discovered through the years that a diplomat is so much more effective when the strongest military in the history of the world is behind him than if he walks in with nothing but an empty briefcase of some papers by academics. So let's put a gun in his hand, not a pencil. And I guarantee you he'll be more effective every time he walks into that room.
Governor Huckabee, many would argue this election is much more than just selecting a president, but selecting a commander-in-chief.
Yes.
To lead our nation in what we're going to face some very difficult and complex national security issues in the years ahead. What has prepared you the most for this critical task, and what strengths are your foundation for the trust and confidence that the soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, and American people must have in you for this most critical role you play as president?
I think there are two things that I would point to. One is that I genuinely understand that it is the role of the commander-in-chief to be a civilian leading the military, but to balance that with understanding that the military knows things that that commander-in-chief does not know. The second thing is this: the most dangerous man in the room is always the man who doesn't know what he doesn't know. That's the guy that scares me most, always has. A person who believes he has no limitations to his own knowledge is a frightening individual. The man who doesn't know what he doesn't know will get you killed. And I believe the number one role the president has in that role of commander-in-chief is to surround himself with the top military people that he can find, that he trusts. This comes to it, he trusts. But it's not enough to trust them if he doesn't listen to them. Ultimately, he has to make that decision. Whether that decision is to build up the military to a certain level or whether it's to deploy that military. But he doggone sure better be surrounded with people that he believes has information that he doesn't have, and that he's willing to make his decisions based on the best information that he can surround himself with. Because I've seen, in particularly this administration, a president who second guesses his military, who punishes those who disagree, and who pushes them to the back of the room, leaving major decisions about the deployment of the military or the lack of deployment to political people, not to military people. There are always political implications to a military decision, but the political implications always have to be backseat to what's best for the security of the United States of America. We cannot make political decisions when it comes to people's safety and security. And if the politics are bad, then they're just bad, and we have to suck it up and live with that. We just can't make first a political decision and then a national security decision.
Sir, presidential leadership, as you know, requires not only explaining the what to the American people, but the why. How will your experience give you the strength to begin to, as President Huckabee, embrace what we need as straight talk on what's going on in the world here, why it's dangerous, and what you must do as President and Commander-in-Chief to secure our freedom and our liberty?
Well, General, I think one of the most important tasks that a president has is that of communicating to the American people. In fact, it's communicating to the Congress, it's communicating to the agencies that are part of the federal government. I don't think there's any better preparation to be president that exists. There's no school for it. There's not a school for presidents, and you get to go to that school. But if there was, it would be to be a governor. Because when you are a governor, you essentially run a microcosm of the federal government. Every agency that you have at the federal level, you have a corresponding agency at the state level, including a military. While most people don't think about that, you're the commander-in-chief of your National Guard forces, whether they're Air Guard or Army Guard. You are the one who ultimately signs off on their deployments when they're federalized and sent into war, as mine were repeatedly sent to war during Afghanistan and Iraq. You do have that relationship with your own military. Granted, it may not be at the level that you would at the federal level, but the big picture of what you do is the most comparable thing that can be experienced. What you learn is that there is an integration of all of the issues that you're dealing with. Members of Congress and people who have had legislative experience tend to see things within the 3 or 4 silos that they're personally expert at because they're on a committee. And maybe they get really, really well versed in tax policy, perhaps in foreign relations, or whatever their committee assignments may be. But they never see the full battlefield. And I would liken it unto this. As a general, you had to see the full battlefield. You had subordinates that were responsible for one specific military action within that great battle plan. But only when it got to the level of the general officer did they understand the big strategy behind what the individual tactics were all about. As a governor, you have to understand not just the specific tactics within the silo. You have to see the full battlefield. You have to understand how those agencies fit together. And I don't think there's any better preparation to do that as president than to have been a governor and to have seen the integration of all of the agencies, all of the different pieces of government, how they work together, how that there's not such a thing as an isolated part of government. It's all integrated. So whether it's economic development versus education versus the environment versus the security, whether it's the infrastructure that we're dealing with, all of that fits together like a puzzle. And your inability to see that is going to mean you will be a fumbling president, because you will always look at things individually and you will never understand that once you start moving a piece on the board, all the other pieces start moving along with it.
By the way, I want to remind you folks that if you have questions, to write them down and pass them out, and they'll get them up to us here for Governor Huckabee. Sir, President Obama announced he will slow the pace of troop withdrawal from Afghanistan, leaving about 5,500 soldiers on the ground into 2017. How would President Huckabee handle the American presence in Afghanistan? And I think more importantly, sir, to what end? Because the numbers by themselves may not be the answer.
Well, and I do think it's very, very faulty to begin to say, here's how many. There's two reasons that's at fault. Number one, you never let your enemy know what your limitations are. I mean, fundamental rule of anything, whether it's a political battle or a military battle, is you don't say, we'll do this, but we won't do that, because now you've just given the enemy the greatest means of defeating you because you've told him what your limitations are. Clint Eastwood said, a man's got to know his limitations, but you don't want your enemy to ever know your limitations. You don't want your enemy to ever know how far you're willing to go and when you're willing to stop and what your capacities are. And I think when we start saying, we will put 5,000 troops, but never more than 6, I mean, that's a gift to your enemy. And what we should say is, we're going to do whatever it takes to bring stability, because we have a lot of American blood and investment in Afghanistan. We have a lot of reasons to want to make sure that the Taliban does not come back into the vacuum, which is a good reason that we don't let the thugs out of Gitmo, so they can go right back and start where they left off. That's an idiotic policy. But we don't announce what we're going to do and why we're going to do it. Some of us are old enough to remember the old movie Billy Jack, okay? And I've often said that we need to operate as a military in many ways that Billy Jack did. We're going to tell them, we're going to take this heel and we're going to put it on that side of your face, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. But we're not going to tell them exactly when it's coming or how we're going to make that happen. We're just going to let them know that we win, they lose, and whatever it takes to get to that goal, that's what we're going to do. And if it means putting more boots on the ground, more ground forces, that's what we'll do. If it means more airstrikes, and we have operated with a very limited number, and I'm sure this is a question we'll get to, in terms of working against ISIS, but very limited airstrikes with both drones and conventional aircraft. And we've hamstrung our own operations by running dozens when we should have been running hundreds, if not thousands, of A-10 Warthogs, busting every time a truck with supplies was on its way to ISIS soldiers. Those should never have arrived. And whatever it takes to decimate, that's what we should be doing.
Sir, the Iran deal, and that phrase is controversial in and of itself, as you read, but a concern. And I think more destabilizing than some would admit. Day one of a Huckabee administration, what do you believe you must do?
We must completely destroy that deal and just make it very clear to the world. This deal is something that the Obama administration believed in, but we do not. And we absolutely will repudiate it immediately. And we will make clear that we now stand with Israel to do whatever it takes to ensure that the Iranians never have nuclear capacity. And let me be very clear, it's not just standing with Israel. Quite frankly, we would be standing with the Saudis, we'd be standing with the Kuwaitis, with the Emirates, with Jordan and Egypt. Nobody in the Middle East wants the Iranians to have nuclear weapons because everybody knows how crazy they are. And when people liken this to the Cold War and say, well, but you know, we've lived all this time in the Cold War with the Soviets, and they had nuclear, we had nuclear. That's true. But both sides understood that we were never going to really use it. That was the whole point. We continued to proliferate the nuclear devices, but not because we wanted to use it, but because we wanted to make sure that the other side didn't use it, and they did the same with us. It was classic mutually assured destruction. We all recognized that, and everybody lived with that clear understanding that the only way to win that war, the Cold War, was to never let it get anything other than cold. If you ever played the game, everybody loses. You're dealing with a different mindset when you're dealing with the Iranians. These are people who would be more than happy to pull the trigger on the weapon once they achieved it, because they believe that their purpose on earth is to destroy the infidels, namely us. They have openly said that they would wipe Israel off the face of the map and bring death to America. For 36 years, they've made consistent threats to our very existence. They're not interested in simply taking a few 100,000 square miles of land. They're not interested in putting their flag up in a few neighboring capitals. They're interested in the absolute destruction of Western civilization and moving our world back to the 7th century under a radical Islamic caliphate. And if we don't understand that that's the nature of the threat we face, then we are dumber than they are, and antiquated in their thoughts. And surely we're not so naive as to believe it. Let me say this, General. I read all 159 pages of the Iranian deal because I wanted to see, was there something in there I was missing? I wanted to give the president the benefit of the doubt. Maybe this was a better deal than I thought. Maybe there was something there that I could say, okay, there's at least something defensible. And after reading it all, I realized there's nothing to defend here. We got nothing. We didn't even get 4 hostages out of America. All we did was essentially create an amazing funding stream for the Iranians of about $150 billion of unfrozen assets. And since dozens of the pages of the 159 are nothing more than listing all of the different governments and private sector businesses that will have those assets unfrozen, I became very quickly convinced that the whole deal was over money. It was over giving money to these entities, both governmental and private sector, who had pressured America and the other countries to release their money without regards to the fact that the release of it was to infuse into the Iranian economy the equivalent of $5 trillion if it were equally released in the United States. Think about, we could use $5 trillion here in America right now, and that's the equivalent of what we released with the $150 billion in unfrozen assets. It was a disastrous deal from word go. The criteria that we had put forth, that John Kerry and Secretary Munoz said would be critical, part of which was anytime, anywhere inspections, no limitations, and 0 nuclear material. Well, nothing that we said was sacred to that deal happened. Nothing. And Iran got everything they wanted, and we got nothing but embarrassed. That's it.
Let's pick up on a couple of things from that response and the previous one on radical Islam and really ISIS expansion. This is a major threat to us and other allies as well. What ideas do you have on how to counter it, contain it, and where possible, Governor, how do we defeat it?
A little perspective I think is important. First of all, ISIS was described by the administration as a JV team. It was like they're just a gnat needing to be swatted. Well, that little gnat now has a GDP, or has total assets that are greater than the GDP of the state of Florida. Stop and think about that. I mean, Florida's a fairly prosperous state, but ISIS controls now $870 billion of assets. That's a significant amount of assets that they now control, a lot of which they've captured either from what we've abandoned or captured from what once was, whether it was an ally or a foe, they have their hands on it. Several things we should be doing immediately. One, making sure they don't have access to any of the internet-related social media so that they can communicate and so that they can recruit. I mean, why on earth do we even tolerate that American-based companies like Twitter, Facebook, Instagram would be able to allow accounts into organizations? You know, you can argue, and I've argued oftentimes because I'm a very strong believer in the constitutional protection of privacy, and I want to make sure that we operate. We're not talking about taking American citizens' rights away, because nobody living in the Middle East who are openly threatening America has any constitutional right. They have 0. And they certainly don't have a constitutional right to be protected in their freedom of speech when their speech is kill Americans. So if we have an American company, we should make sure that that American company cannot do business with, even to a consumer level, to a person who is transmitting from a foreign location, Facebook, Twitter messages, Instagram messages, any other form of social media in which they can basically move their ideas and also move their recruitment. We should freeze any asset that we find that is connected to them. Not only their direct assets, but the indirect assets. Any country that in any way does economic business with ISIS or an affiliate of any radical Islamic group, we should cut them off. And we should make clear there will be no economic activity. We will make sure that that doesn't happen. And then we need to recruit the best cybersecurity force that we can possibly get. Some of these folks may be 19 years old or 14 years old, for heaven's sakes. The people that we have arrested for hacking, we ought to give them an option. Instead of going to prison, you can go to work for us. We want you to hack into every account that you can find. And if you do it faithfully and you find some good things that are useful to protecting America, you know, that'll be your service to the country rather than us paying for your food clothing and shelter in a federal prison for the next 6 years. So take your pick. But we ought to be going after the cyber space that really may be the most important battlefield that we win or lose on over the coming generation.
And we'll come to that in a second. I want to go to Vladimir Putin right now. He's in the news every day.
Yes.
His rhetoric and actions would almost indicate a return to a Cold War scenario. As president, how would you confront him, contain him, and deter him from the path he appears to be on right now?
Well, he feels that he can do anything he wants, and frankly, right now he can, because he has rolled President Obama like a California sushi. I mean, this has been the most amazing display of weakness that we've ever seen of the United States president. We say there's a red line, but there isn't.
Yeah.
We picked the wrong sides in every country in the Middle East. We misjudged what was going on in Egypt. We totally misread the situation in Yemen. We misjudged Libya. We made a disaster of Iraq by not having a status of forces agreement in place when we left. We thought we were finished in Afghanistan. Now even the president acknowledges that we weren't. I can't think of any place. We obviously boogered up the Iranian deal. We put more pressure on Israel to stop building bedrooms for its citizens in Judea and Samaria than we put on Iran to stop building a bomb. I mean, I can't think of any strong, solid foreign policy decision that we have been successful at over the past 7 years. I just can't. The reset with Russia, what a joke that's turned out to be. So if you're Vladimir Putin, you look at this and you see there's a vacuum in which Putin can go into Syria, make a deal with Assad, a vacuum into Egypt where he can say, if America won't be your friend, I will be. That's a relationship that we should recover, because al-Sisi is frankly our best hope for stability in the Middle East, apart from Israel. And he's a rational thinker, and he's not crazy. And the fact that we picked a Muslim Brotherhood leader, which was an insane and completely irrational act back when Mubarak first went out of power. But now that al-Sisi is there, we need to recognize that he offers for us the greatest level of potential stability in that region. So I may be kind of drifting away from your question, but here's what I want to say about how do we contain Putin? The bigger question is not just Putin, but Russia. Russia only has the ability to move forward, go into places like Crimea and the Ukraine, and to prop up Syria if they have the assets that they get from energy. I believe that the domestic energy policy of the United States is our best foreign policy weapon. So here's what I would do as president. I would aggressively explore every ounce of energy we have under our feet. By the way, we have several hundred years of coal, oil, and gas under our feet. We have the largest oil reserves in all the world, more than the Saudis. Most Americans don't even know that. They don't realize the extraordinary vast resources we have, and now we actually have the capacity to extract it. So explore it, extract it, and then